Can you be the world number 2 and still have to explain yourself? Carlos Alcaraz has proven to be one of the most talented and charismatic tennis players of his generation, but he has also faced criticism following the release of his Netflix documentary. The reason? His desire to live like a 22-year-old without giving up the elite level of tennis. And now, from Roland Garros, where he is defending his title, Alcaraz has decided to speak openly. What does Carlitos really think about pressure, his career, and the criticism? Stay tuned to discover the more human side of the champion. Carlos Alcaraz is already in Paris. With the Rome title in his pocket and the fresh memory of his 2024 Roland Garros victory, the Mercian is ready for battle. But before stepping onto Philippe Chatrier, he sat down with the tournament's official magazine to talk about his current moment. And also to defend himself. Because after the release of his Netflix documentary, many accused him of not taking tennis seriously enough. Carlos' response was firm: "I've worked so hard to get here. Talent is needed, but without hard work, it's useless. For years, I sacrificed many things when I was younger to achieve my goal." Words that reflect undeniable maturity and dismantle the myth of a young man living between parties and cameras. Alcaraz insists that if he's where he is today, it's thanks to discipline, effort, and the support of those around him, especially during difficult times. In the interview, he also spoke about his affection for Roland Garros, a tournament that not only brought him his greatest glory but has been a part of his life since childhood. "When I was a kid, I'd run home to watch the matches on TV. I dreamed of playing there. I remember telling myself, one day I'll be on that court. That dream is now a reality." And although he admits that clay is not his favorite surface, he recognizes that he grew up on it and has a special connection to clay tournaments. Naturally, the name Rafael Nadal came up. For Carlos, the Mallorcan is not just an idol but a constant source of learning. Rafa is an exceptional person, very humble. "I learned a lot from how he approaches matches, the passion he puts into every point, and how he manages emotions in key moments." Words of admiration that show the new generation doesn't seek to break with a legacy but to proudly continue it. Carlos also spoke about his coach, Juan Carlos Ferrero, Roland Garros champion in 2003. "He was really strong. He moved very well. Sometimes I dream of having his same game. I think he was more complete than I am today." Another sign of the respect Carlitos has for the history of Spanish tennis. And that, even at the top, he hasn't lost his humility. Carlos Alcaraz arrives at Roland Garros with a backpack full of pressure, expectations, and criticism, but also with titles, confidence, and a past that justifies his present. Behind the champion is a young man who has sacrificed a lot, who continues to grow, and who understands that greatness is measured not just in trophies, but in the ability to inspire and remain true to oneself. Far from what some believe, Carlos is not improvising his career, he is building it with every shot, every lesson, and every word. What happens when your idol becomes your doubles partner? Carlos Alcaraz, current world number 2 and Roland Garros title defender, has shared a very special memory, his experience alongside Rafael Nadal at the Paris Olympics. Beyond the victories, finals, and trophies, what he experienced with Rafa has become one of the greatest lessons of his young but impressive career. What exactly did he learn from Nadal? And why might that experience shape his future as a tennis player? Stay with us, because this goes far beyond a simple anecdote. Carlos Alcaraz comes to Roland Garros with momentum. With titles in Monte Carlo and Rome, a final in Barcelona, and the motivation to defend his Paris crown, the Mercian is at the center of all attention. But in the midst of this whirlwind of victories, he's taken a pause to talk about something more valuable than any trophy: learning. In an interview with the Paris tournament, Alcaraz recalled an experience that defines much of his growth as a player: his participation in doubles with Rafael Nadal during the Olympics. For him, that moment was more than just sharing the court. "It was an exceptional experience to be close to my idol," he said. What he learned with Nadal goes beyond technique. It's something that, in his own words, he will carry throughout his career. When talking about Rafa, Carlos doesn't hold back praise. "I admire his way of playing, his presence on the court, his mindset, and the love he has for tennis. But what impacted him most was his closeness, his personality off the court. Rafa is an exceptional person, very humble. When you meet him for the first time, he's someone just like you or me." A simple phrase, but one that reveals the impact of sharing a locker room and team dynamic with a living legend of Spanish tennis. The most valuable lesson, however, came from watching him in action. According to Alcaraz, the biggest takeaway from Nadal was how to handle pressure and mentally prepare for a match. I learned how he managed pressure situations, how he approached matches, and saw the passion he transmitted. Because when you play with Nadal, you don't just share a court. You share a mindset, a way of understanding the sport that has been key in winning 22 Grand Slams. In that sense, Carlitos believes that what he experienced with Rafa at the Olympics will be hugely useful throughout his career. And rightly so. Learning from the best on clay, and doing so in an environment like the Olympics, isn't something easily forgotten. It leaves a mark. It's pure education. Alcaraz has shown he can write his own story, but also that he respects the ones written before him. And on that list, Nadal holds the highest place for him, not just as a ranking reference, but as a model of behavior, humility, and passion for tennis. Carlos Alcaraz shined in Rome, won his first Italian Masters 1000 title, and took home a €1 million prize. But his victory also exposed an old controversy that resurfaces every year: the prize money inequality between the men's and women's circuits. While the Spaniard celebrated his big win, many were asking, why did champion Jasmine Paolini earn less money for the same achievement? And, more importantly, when will the promise of equality be fulfilled? Carlos Alcaraz was crowned champion at the Foro Italico after defeating Jannik Sinner, taking home a check worth €985,030. Jasmine Paolini, champion in singles and also doubles, earned €107,640 less, with a prize of €877,390. Although both lifted the same trophy, they didn't earn the same. And that has sparked many voices. Angelo Bonaghi, president of the Italian Tennis Federation, didn't avoid the topic. In fact, he used it to criticize the Grand Slam monopoly, demanding that Rome be given the same status as tournaments like Roland Garros. According to him, the Italian tournament deserves more because Italy is experiencing its best tennis era in decades. And in that context, he feels strong enough to demand change. But beyond institutional claims, the question is clear: why hasn't prize money between men and women been equalized yet? A few years ago, the FIP announced a plan to make it happen, but in 2025, the promise remains unfulfilled. Organizers justify it by saying the women's tournament is not mandatory participation, which supposedly affects revenue and the event's level. But that excuse loses weight when you see that this year featured a full roster of stars in both draws, except for Novak Djokovic. While the men's tournament distributed over €8 million, the women's side only received €6 million. A considerable gap that continues to create discomfort among players, fans, and even international media. Because if the level, effort, and entertainment are the same, why isn't the prize? The tournament has made progress. Rome now spans 2 calendar weeks like the Grand Slams, reinforcing its status as a key event. And with the promise of a retractable roof for Campo Central in 2028, the FIP wants to keep competing with the top events. But it still lacks one key piece: total equality between its champions. Carlos Alcaraz's victory in Rome is historic. But it also exposed an uncomfortable reality: inequality remains at one of the world's most important tournaments. And while intentions exist, actions have yet to follow. Italian tennis is in a golden age, and it's the perfect time for its flagship tournament to take the step the sport needs, to reward men and women equally. Because only then can we talk about true progress. Rafael Nadal has spoken. A few days before receiving a well-deserved tribute at Roland Garros, the Spanish champion gave an emotional and sincere interview to L'Equipe. He reflected on his career, retirement, the current state of tennis, and especially on Carlos Alcaraz and the recent controversies surrounding his documentary. What does Rafa think of the young Mercian? What's his opinion on the Sinner case? Does he miss the tour? Today, we analyze the key points of this conversation with one of the greatest of all time. Rafa Nadal begins by talking about his new life outside professional tennis. "I'm happy not to be in pain," he admits. While he acknowledges there are nights with less sleep due to his son, he also makes it clear he doesn't miss the court. Retirement wasn't an easy decision, but it was a natural one. His body simply said enough. The foot, injured and operated on since 2005, eventually determined everything. "I couldn't run freely, and without that, competing made no sense," he explains. His words show calm and satisfaction. Nadal doesn't seem to have unfinished business with tennis. "I'm at peace. I know I did everything I could to keep going," he says, making it clear his retirement wasn't due to lack of will, but out of respect for his body. Still, he admits that during the first few days after saying goodbye, he would have loved to keep playing. But the most talked about part of the interview comes when he speaks about Carlos Alcaraz, whom he knows well and deeply admires. Regarding Alcaraz's documentary, Rafa delivers a clear message: it doesn't reflect who Carlos really is. He doesn't come across as a player who trains, but rather someone who loves partying. And that's not true, Nadal states firmly. In his words, there's a strong defense of the young Mercian: Carlos is a great professional. He works very hard. The documentary was framed the wrong way. These statements come at a time when Alcaraz has been criticized by some voices in the circuit, accusing him of taking his career too lightly. Rafa, from his position of authority, makes it clear that the perception shown is unfair, and that behind each of Alcaraz's successes lie hard work, effort, and discipline. He also had words for Jannik Sinner, involved in a doping controversy. "I'm totally convinced that Jannik never meant to cheat," Nadal asserts. He sympathizes with him and what he's gone through. For Rafa, the fairest thing is to trust the investigations. If the justice system makes decisions, it's because they have all the information we don't. A message of prudence and fairness. In this interview, Nadal not only reflects on his career with humility and maturity, but also positions himself as a moral compass in today's tennis. He defends the new generation, supports those facing challenges, and makes it clear that his love for the sport continues, even if he's no longer on the court. Rafa Nadal has said goodbye to competition, but not to truth, respect, and legacy. And that, now more than ever, is still essential in tennis. Carlos Alcaraz has fired the first big warning ahead of Roland Garros. After dominating in Rome, the Mercian tennis player is positioned as the main favorite to win the year's second Grand Slam, even ahead of world number 1, Jannik Sinner. The battle for Paris has begun, and Alcaraz has already struck first. But why do betting odds and public opinion place him above the Italian? What does this favoritism say about his true dominance on clay? Here's everything you need to know. Jannik Sinner has been the most solid player on tour for months. His consistency, powerful tennis, and strong mentality led him to the top of the ATP ranking. In any tournament he enters, he's the favorite, except when Carlos Alcaraz is on the other side of the net. The Spaniard has become his biggest nemesis. In Rome, Alcaraz beat him again, and it wasn't just any win, it was a tactical and psychological masterclass. With that result, it's now 4 straight wins for the Mercian over Sinner. And the message is clear: if anyone knows how to beat the number 1, it's Carlos Alcaraz. This is already reflected at Roland Garros. Betting markets confirm it: the Spaniard is the favorite. His victory pays at €2.35 per euro wagered, while Sinner's is at 2.75. In other words, the tennis world sees him as the top contender. It doesn't matter that Carlos is ranked number 2. In Paris, the place where he was crowned last year, everyone knows he's the man to beat. But the favoritism isn't just based on numbers. Alcaraz comes to Paris in one of his strongest moments of the season. He's just won 2 Masters 1000 titles on clay, Monte Carlo and Rome, and has shown a tactical maturity that puts him ahead of even more experienced players. His confidence is sky high. And that, at Roland Garros, is priceless. And what about Sinner? Although his return after the suspension has been very positive, including a final in Rome, there's still a slight lack of competitive rhythm. Also, the stats don't lie: on clay, Sinner has never beaten Carlos, nor has he reached the same level of dominance. In Paris, the pressure is double, trying to win his first Roland Garros and, at the same time, break that losing streak against his main rival. There are other names to consider too. Alexander Zverev, though inconsistent, remains a threat in Grand Slams. Novak Djokovic, despite a weak 2025, is always a contender when a major title is on the line. And young talents like Jack Draper, Holger Rune, or Stefanos Tsitsipas, as well as claycourt specialists like Casper Ruud, who's already proven he can reach a Roland Garros final, can't be counted out either.